This is SG2 Perspectives, a conversation with SG2 experts and industry thought leaders about the biggest trends in healthcare and what we expect that's going to mean for the future of healthcare delivery.
Data storytelling, I think one of the reasons it's gained such popularity is that organizations are having access to more data than ever before, either the data they gather or capture, or even data patients bring to them. But if we're being fully honest, we haven't fully realized the full benefit of that data. Our course offers a way to be really thoughtful about how do we look at data and how do we share with our audience the most important learnings from that data. Most importantly, as a way to drive action. We're very good at data analysis and learning from data, but how do we get to a place where it really is the foundation of our decision making?
Welcome to SG2 Perspectives. I'm your host, Trevor DaRin, and I have with me two colleagues who are going to talk about strategic planning and the strategic plan in particular. Rebecca Limestall leads our enterprise strategy practice, on which Janelle, Kwan, and I are members. And over the last year, we've done a number of research projects and initiatives around different pieces of the strategic planning team process, and most recently, the product, the strategic plan. So that's what I wanted Rebecca and Janelle to talk about with us today. So thanks so much for joining as always. Janelle, we undertook this initiative because we feel like we see a lot of strategic plans and many aren't being used to their full potential today. What do you look for? What do you see to know that a plan's maybe not reaching its full potential or being used in the best way today?
When we've embarked on this research, there were a few common pain points when we looked across plans that felt like they weren't fully realizing all the opportunities that were available. The first one was this idea of thinking of the plan as almost semi-jokingly think of it as like completing your taxes. It's something that you have to do, but it's a box checking rather than using as a valuable opportunity to rethink your current course and figure out what can we do to most meaningfully chart a path for the future. Related to that is this feeling of the format and the process that we go about developing our strategic plan, I'd argue are not necessarily aligned with all of the things that are happening in the broader landscape. Whether it's the data that we're looking at or the questions that we're asking, those need to be updated, but we haven't seen that just yet in some of the strategic plans that we've reviewed. Rebecca, I know you've been on the road a lot this year.
You hit upon some of the big ones. The kitchen sink approach is my personal least favorite, where we put everything in there that we might possibly want to accomplish in the next several years. And that essentially just becomes a list that no one uses. We also will see that folks will use very descriptive terms to the point that I actually have two strategic plans, one from an academic medical center, one from a rural IDN, that look essentially the same. That's another example of being so generic that it actually isn't helpful in decision making. We mentioned something in here that's the absence of a plot, a cohesive message that connects all the pieces. That's mostly what we're getting at when we are saying that these plans are not moving organizations forward in the way that they could.
We are talking about this idea of strategy as functionally in some ways as a story. It's helping us to understand where are we today and who do we want to be in the future? And what do we need to do to be able to realize that future? Those who sit on the strategy side are deeply intertwined with the work, but also across our organization, all roles and functions are part of that work. So how do we clearly articulate what role do you play in achieving this strategy and what steps do you need to take to help us move there? This feeling of you're selling a strategy more broadly. I think the last thing I would add is the timing aspect. We are on that 5 to 10 year horizon, which candidly provides us with a little bit of cover. But increasingly, we're going to ask you to think about shorter timeframes. There's a little bit of urgency with that, but it also allows you to be more agile in an environment that's rapidly kind of changing.
You get upon something there, Janelle, that was a struggle for us when we were doing this research, is connecting the process and the product. And oftentimes they're so intertwined. And one of the things that's so important, whether it ends up in the final product or not, is having a clear distinction of who you are as an organization and who you will not be. What are the things you choose not to do? That is just as important to strategy as deciding what you will do.
And you did a good job not sounding too negative, even though I teed the question up of like, talk about all the things that aren't going great about strategic plans, because we see a lot and there's a lot that's really strong. What in your mind makes a good strategic plan? What are a couple of things that always pop off the page to you? Rebecca, please.
I tend to be a strategy or purist. And we went into this research with a strong desire to say that strategic plans are going to be all about strategy, differentiation, what's going to set us apart. But quite frankly, that's not the only type of good strategic plan. That's one of the types focused on differentiation. But there's another type as well that allows for organizations that need to be more operationally minded, quality minded, high reliability minded, focus on the things that are important. And the concept there is that it acts as a prioritization tool. So we essentially see that there are two different types of strategic plans that can be effective in day-to-day decision-making. One is in differentiation. The other is in prioritization.
Where your organization sits can help you figure out which of those paths. When we think of the pure strategy play that Rebecca alluded to, typically well suited for organizations who are in competitive markets and have to work to find their identity within that market. And it asks you to answer some probing questions. Where can we win? Where are things that maybe we need to seed? And where are there situations where maybe partnership can be one way of bridging critical gaps or differentiating ourselves? Contrast, the prioritization one is about finding a unified identity. So it's common or works well for organizations that maybe post-merger or trying to deal with their size. But also if you are in a market that does not have all the benefits of organic growth and you are working to figure out how can we remove some of the noise, create some clarity around where we go and how we allocate our resources. Or as a bridge to a larger, more loftier strategic aim that you maybe aren't ready for today. And there are some foundational elements you have to put in place, be it financial or operational, to get yourself there.
The thing that both of these types of plans have in common is that they are a decision-making tool. They are a tool that folks are using to drive decisions across their organization, whether it's financial, strategic decisions, where we place our resources, our workforce, what do we say yes to, and what are the things that we forego.
And the organizations that we talked with throughout this work that had moved that furthest along use it as that gut check. If they are considering a strategy or opportunity, there's a direct tie to say, where is that reflected in our strategic plan? And do those two things align?
I really like the distinction you made. And I think it tees up a great questions for strategy teams to ask themselves around, is this plan really focused on differentiation or around prioritization? Because if it's not doing either of those things, I think it should raise a red flag. All right, what makes a good plan really effective though? Asked another way, not to be too negative, what are the common pitfalls that you sometimes see or that you look for in a plan, Rebecca?
We've outlined a number of these and have thought through various parts of the strategic plan and how they are effective and what are some pitfalls within that. One is we do believe that having the strong foundation of a clear direction is important. We outlined this as well in some of our strategic mandates work that we did earlier last year too, but knowing where we're going. A common pitfall that is associated with that, so if you think the flip of that coin is being that laundry list, that's kitchen sink that we mentioned before. The next one is a balance between internal and external, making sure that we're taking into account the market dynamics with our capabilities within the organization. This is strategy 101, but you would be surprised how often organizations default to one versus the other, assume they have the budget, assume that we can do all these things, assume that everything is possible that we set our minds to do. And quite frankly, that's not the reality we live in. And we need to keep that into check. The next one is the proactive versus reactive. Common things that pop up that make me say, ooh, that might be a red flag is if I hear things like, we need to just refresh our plan, or we were caught unprepared with this unanticipated thing that we could have known. These are some of the ways that we know that we may not have been as proactive as we wanted to be in the strategic plan. Janelle, why don't you outline some of the others?
A rule of thumb also being anchored in data as the guiding force for some of the decisions. Historically, we rely on our past performance. Well, this is what we saw in the past that dictate our future. So I think this is a challenge to think through, looking at increasingly more diverse and expansive data sets. I think a consumer in particular is a good example. If you look at industries outside of healthcare, like retail, for example, they know what a consumer is going to buy or what they're going to do the minute, even before they set foot in the store. And that's not necessarily a question we know the answer to when we think about health systems. So how can we use some of that consumer data to better understand not just what care our patients need, but what are some other underlying unmet needs? And this is a nice plug for our SG2 share of wallet data. It's been a really wonderful tool for helping to figure out the answer to some of those important questions. the need to align with our stakeholders and to make sure that we arrive at strategies that are collectively agreed upon as important across those stakeholders. So that means syncing up with business plans, our operating plans, budgets, and also continuing in the COVID era, which seems so far away, that alliance between strategy, finance, and operations. We deepen those relationships during that time period, and it's important for us to make sure that we carry that going forward.
We believe so strongly in this. We're actually spending our next time of research figuring out the communication pathway for strategy execution. How do you better communicate to inspire action? The strategic plan being part of that, but that is a new area of research we're undergoing right now. Along with the stakeholders is accountability in making sure that we are able to hit things, who's responsible, who's accountable, who's moving things forward, and with that, a measurement of success. And then finally, to communicate the path forward, show the incremental progress and ensuring that engagement. So it doesn't just become our strategic plan, but it's the organization's strategic plan.
The key with that is not just measurability, but what is actually feasible. The benefits of the tracking is not only measure progress, but to be able to offer our stakeholders regular updates on where we are. That provides both clarity, but it also helps engender and ensure buy-in from them. So as you think about defining what those levels of accountability and what metrics you want to track, keeping it straightforward and manageable in a way that you can collect, but also routinely be able to provide an update on is a clear demarcator between it going into a drawer and no one looking at it and people feeling all on board that they're working towards the same goal.
Janelle, you started to get into some of the how and the expectations on the planning team. You run a couple courses around nimble execution, data-driven strategy. Connect those dots. Why are those skills so important? Why are so many teams asking us for help developing those skills? How is it an important part of not just the planning process, but making a better product?
So I think with our nimble execution course, it really forces two themes. One, we're very good at saying what we want to do and will do, and we're not as good at drawing lines around what we won't do. So our nimble execution course really forces on how do we ask a series of pointed questions to help us figure out where we will play and where we won't play. It also builds a culture of some calculated risk taking. We focus a lot on the idea of rapid experimentation as an engine for learning and evolution. And that's typically not reflected in a lot of the strategic plans we see. But by building that skill, you're more willing to take risks, but also learn and pivot your strategy as needed. Data storytelling, I think one of the reasons it's gained such popularity is that organizations are having access to more data than ever before, either the data they gather or capture, or even data patients bring to them. But if we're being fully honest, we haven't fully realized the benefit of that data. Our course offers a way to be really thoughtful about how do we look at data and how do we share with our audience the most important learnings from that data. Most importantly, as a way to drive action. We're very good at data analysis and learning from data, but how do we get to a place where it is the foundation of our decision making?
Okay, Rebecca, you get to put the bow on this research because we undertook a number of research initiatives around strategic planning, the process, the team, et cetera, in the last year because we felt like expectations were changing. This most recent body of research was really focused on the product, the strategic plan. Connect those dots. How are the changing expectations being reflected in the plan?
Yes, that couple years post-COVID, after the financial tumultuousness, we were leveling out into, as our colleagues within Vizient would say, strategy being back in the driver's seat. The capability to step up within the organization to move the organization forward. But with that, we don't have as broad swath ability as what we had in the past. We've got tighter finances. We've got tougher operations. We need to be more decisive and place a handful of bold bets within strategy. As we looked at some of the work for the last year and a half, we really thought about what is the role of the strategist? How are they pushing organizations forward? What's the process? What's the product? And so we dove into a lot of those pieces. We found that strategists need to be more effective in being persuasive, getting things done, calling folks to action, more decisive, out of the wishy-washy frame, more into saying yes, no, even saying no to good ideas in favor of better ideas. We also found that organizations, CSOs, and strategy leaders need to be more predictive. This is where we're going. This is how it will happen. This is what we believe. The hypothesis is that we will achieve that. And then being able to pivot it. That's where the nimbleness comes in. The desire for data storytelling is, in effect, what the strategic plan is. It's calling people to action through our analyses, our recommendations within strategy, and it's being able to put it into effect with execution. We also talked a lot about the strategic mandates. Different organizations, different markets are being called to either grow or incremental change or scale, and they have these new mandates that they need to be thinking about where to go and what does that mean for their strategic plan, their execution, and how strategy sits at this overall C-suite table. So we learned a lot, and we continue to learn from each of you as you're executing your strategy, as you're pushing your strategy forward. By and large, most organizations are not strongly differentiated yet. They're not appealing to the customer yet. They haven't created a seamless way of interacting with the healthcare system yet. And we're excited to help you as you strategically get there.
Great framing, great summary. Thank you both so much for sharing your perspective and for sharing this research. Look forward to having you back on the podcast again soon. Thanks for listening. If you like this episode, please subscribe, rate, and review us, and or follow us on Twitter and LinkedIn at SG2 Healthcare. And if you want to talk more about innovative healthcare strategies, you can always email me at sg2perspectives@sg2.com. Finally, SG2 is a Vizient company, and there are a bunch of Vizient podcasts that you might like. You can find them at Vizient /podcasts. Have a great day.